Hey guys, so welcome back to doing your videos. It's been a little while, so hopefully you remember how this goes. I'm really hoping that I fixed the glitches that have been associated with my videos. If you still don't see all the slides, again, you'll just write them in class. I am still working on getting all of that cleared, but I'm using my phone instead of my tablet, so maybe that'll help. So now we are focusing all of our energy, if you will, into the energy of life. And so how organisms get energy based off of the sun and different types of organisms and how they get that. So not all of us can eat the sun or take in sun energy and just make food. So there are different processes that occur. This will be a very lengthy unit. It will be, I'm not going to lie, it's going to be a little bit difficult. A lot of practicing and memorizing for this particular chapter. We are going to take it slow and baby steps. So if you have any questions throughout the entire process, please make sure that you are asking me on Edpuzzle or in class. You guys generally do a really good job of that. But again, I don't know if you don't know something. So let's go ahead and talk about the objectives first. After this video, you should be able to state why living things need energy. You should be able to describe how autotrophs and heterotrophs obtain energy. You should be able to compare and contrast glucose and ATP. And finally, you should be able to outline how living things make and use food. So we will go through all of these things in class and a little bit on this video. I will be adding notes in class, so you make sure you leave some space throughout each slide. All right, so the first question I have for you, or I guess... yeah, it's a question. So why living things need energy? And so us as humans, we know we need energy, right? We need energy to sleep. We need energy to move, walk. If you go long periods of time without eating, not only are you going to become what's known as hangry, you will eventually be able or find that you don't feel good. And then eventually over more and more time, you cause damage to your body. So let's learn about the nitty-gritty of that. So the first thing I want to talk about, I guess I need to establish the fact that energy is required to break down and build up molecules and to transport molecules across the plasma membrane. We've just discussed osmosis and diffusion and the transferring of things in and out of our cells. That's super essential for our cells to process vital life functions. And so we need energy. And how we know we get energy through our food, but not every single organism does that. They don't just chew up food. But again, everything needs energy, some form of energy. So energy is defined as the ability to do work. You often see energy at work in living things. So a bird can fly, you're playing volleyball, you're running down the field with a football, or I guess it's basketball season, so you're running down the court with a basketball. Any of these things require energy. So these are obvious ways that living things use energy. But there are other ways that are not so obvious that energy is required. So for example, you're breathing and you don't necessarily control your breathing. You're constantly breathing. You go to sleep, you know you're breathing, and that's a good thing that you are not in charge of that process, because of the fact that if you had to go to sleep and you couldn't breathe, there would be a problem there. So inside every cell of all living things, energy is needed to carry out life's processes, such as cellular respiration. Energy is required to break down and build up molecules and to transport molecules across the plasma membrane, just like I said. Unfortunately, not all energy is used up. It's not, I guess I shouldn't say it's not efficient, but it's not all used in the way we want it. Some of that energy is actually lost to our environment, and that's known as heat. So if you blow in a window or if you blow your breath out, it feels pretty hot, right? So you're blowing out some sorts of energy. There's a basic flow to energy, and so I've written this flow down. You should probably write this down. We are going to get into more detail on this flow, but how it works: energy is captured, it changes form, you use that energy for work, and then some of it is lost as heat. That is the basic flow of energy. So if you want to star that or highlight that or do something, again, we are going to go into a lot more detail, but that's pretty well the basics of it all. So unlike matter, energy cannot be recycled. So you got what you got. So that's why we need a constant input of food in us, because we can't just recycle some of our energy. We have to have that availability of glucose in order to carry out these life functions. So where do living organisms get this chemical energy? So in the last slide, I asked you a question: where do organisms get chemical energy? And so before we get into that idea, we need to know a couple of terms. One of those terms is known as an autotroph, and the other term is known as heterotroph. So the chemical energy that organisms need comes from food, which is, I guess it's pretty obvious, and you guys know that by now. We have spent a whole bunch of time talking about food and organic molecules that make up food. Remember, we talked about carbs, proteins, fats and oils, and all of these essential organic molecules that are super important when it comes to our food, when it comes to breaking it down for energy. We are obtaining energy from this food. Okay, all of this energy has these type of chemical bonds that we break down and we then take in. In terms of obtaining food for energy, there are two types of organisms. Like I said, you have your autotrophs and your heterotrophs. And what is the difference between them? So autotrophs are organisms that make their own food. So you probably can think of tons of examples right now. Big one I can think of is plants, right? They make their own food. So most autotrophs use energy in sunlight to make food in a process called photosynthesis. So again, they capture sunlight, and that's basically how a food chain starts. Not basically, it is how a food chain starts. You capture sun energy. That sun energy is then used in a process known as photosynthesis. The end product of photosynthesis is glucose. And that's a good thing, right? Because then you have these other guys that come in known as heterotrophs. And heterotrophs, what they do is they cannot make their own food, so they get their food by consuming. They are known as consumers, and they consume autotrophs or other heterotrophs. We will be adding notes about consumers, and we talked about this yesterday already, so you shouldn't freak out, and you should already know some of these things, but we're going to talk about carnivores, herbivores, omnivores, and all of those other terms. But you should know right now the consumer and producers. Producers, again, is another name for autotroph. Heterotroph, another name for that, is a consumer. These consume organisms to get food or other autotrophs. I feel like I'm sounding really confusing right now, and I apologize. So quick reminder from the last slides, we had our autotrophs and our heterotrophs. Autotrophs, also known as producers. Heterotrophs, also known as consumers. So your producers, they capture sun energy, and they start a food chain, and then they are eaten by our consumers. Your consumer is also known as your, they can be broken down even further, and you have your omnivores, your carnivores, and your herbivores. So different types of consumers, also known as heterotrophs. And so we come back to the idea of energy. And so we have different types of energy. Energy known as glucose and energy known as ATP. So organisms mainly use two types, like I just said, glucose and ATP. Both molecules are used as fuel throughout the living world. Both molecules are key players in photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So why do we have both of these molecules present? Why can't we just have glucose, or why can't we just have ATP and call it good? Well, I'll get there. Let's talk about what glucose is first. So glucose is a simple carbohydrate with the chemical formula C6H12O6. I'll tell you that in class. It stores chemical energy in a concentrated, stable form. So glucose is a very stable form. In your body, glucose is the form of energy that is carried in your blood and taken up by each of your trillions of cells. Glucose is the end product of photosynthesis and is a nearly universal food for life. So everything in some form consumes glucose. Everything that is living interacts with glucose in some way. Now, ATP, on the other hand, is an energy-carrying molecule that cells use for energy. So again, it's particular to cells, ATP for cells. ATP is made during the first half of photosynthesis and then used for energy during the second half of photosynthesis. We will talk about photosynthesis in detail in the next video. You are definitely going to hate photosynthesis for a while, and it's okay. So again, glucose is made at the end of photosynthesis. But ATP is used for the first part of photosynthesis to help make that glucose. So again, ATP is also used for energy by cells for most other cellular processes. ATP releases energy, and when it does that, it becomes a different form. We're not going to spend too much time on that. We'll get to that when we talk about photosynthesis. So I'm back to my question of why do living things need glucose if ATP is a molecule that cells use for energy? Why don't we just make ATP, be done with it? And the quick answer is remember when I talked about glucose, I said that it is a stable molecule. So and we can think of this as like a packaging kind of thing. Glucose is more stable, so it's better for storing and transporting energy. However, glucose is huge. It's a big molecule. So in order for a cell to actually use that much energy, it wouldn't be feasible for the cell because cells are super tiny. They can only use so much. So ATP contains just the right amount of energy to power life processes within the cell by itself. Again, we need glucose to start up the energy process, but it is too big for our cells to use. So we have ATP that uses the right amount of energy given off by glucose in order for us to use it. So you can really think of them as like partners in crime, I guess not in crime, but partners in life. They help each other, but they do not overlap each other. So one is not more important than the other. Glucose and ATP are essential. If you don't have one, you cannot have the other. And so this comes into the idea of making and using food. So again, we are spending all of this video talking about energy for life. So we need food to undertake our life processes. Plants need energy to undertake or to make glucose because eventually, yes, you may say that you don't eat any salad in the world, which is fine, but something along the lines of your food chain ate a plant and that plant captured that energy. So there are different levels of consumers. And you may be like the tertiary or the quaternary, but you're still at some point capturing some sort of food, or plant energy, or some sort of sunlight energy. So the flow of energy through living organisms begins with photosynthesis. This process stores energy from sunlight in the chemical bonds of glucose. By breaking the chemical bonds in glucose, cells release the stored energy and make the ATP they need. And so the opposite of photosynthesis is known as cellular respiration. And this is where glucose is broken down and ATP is made. So you can think of photosynthesis and cellular respiration, two sides of the same coin. You need one to get the other. The products of one is the reactants of the other. Together, the two processes store and release energy in living organisms. So you cannot live without photosynthesis occurring. The two processes, they work together hand in hand. And believe it or not, everything that plants are doing and that consumers are doing is recycling oxygen in Earth's atmosphere. So plants, if you want to think about it as breathing out, plants breathe out oxygen. We take in the oxygen. We breathe out carbon dioxide. Plants take in the carbon dioxide. It's a beautiful relationship that must happen together. So, and we're going to talk a little bit about the environment. If we didn't have plants and trees and other different types of producers, we as a human race could not live. And so it then becomes a moral issue of the way we live. Is it feasible for our Earth's survival? And that's pretty well all I have for you for this video. The next video, we will begin talking about photosynthesis. It's a pretty in-depth process. There's 2 stages to it. After that, we start talking about cellular respiration. And this all ties back to the idea that organisms need energy. We need energy to live. And in order to do that, there are chemical processes behind that. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me on Edpuzzle. I know that this video may have been a little bit confusing or I've sounded a little bit weird. I will cover more in class. I will probably add a few more notes to every slide, so leave a little bit of room. We will start talking about producers and consumers in class, so don't freak out if you are not understanding right now. We should have talked about this before you actually watch the video. So if you have any questions, again, ask me on Edpuzzle. See you later.